Good evening, students.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Okay. So right, I've not checked yet, but I hope some of you have already written the exam that is given to you, right? Okay, not finish it off quickly. Don't plan the next set of tests. We'll go in the order of how we started discussion now. So we are done with the 1.4 and 9.3 chapters in the first test and 9.2 and the 9.4 in yesterday's test, correct? Okay. So the other two chapters that we kind of finished our 9.1 and 9.6, markers and human genetics part, correct? 9.1 and 9.6. And then we'll go with ecological and epidemiological anthropology. Okay, like that we take two tests together. So we should be done, I think, with 1 week delay, more or less. So can we plan another test on Sunday, coming Sunday? Do you have other tests planned for coming week? So can we have the test in a week on Sunday? So 9.1 and 9.6 markers and human genetic part methods, human genetic methods and applications. Okay, if there's any overlap with the other exams, if you know, I'll adjust the date accordingly. But keep that in mind. We'll discuss that later. Right. So in the last class, we finished talking about the ecological anthropology part. Correct. On Saturday, we discussed ecological anthropology part. This morning, I've posted some material on the last unit before that, it is markers. So I'm going to post some material for you to read on the ecological anthropology tonight. Okay. Plus, there are a couple of things that I'm going to show you with respect to the epidemiological anthropology. I'll also post them simultaneously. So epidemiological anthropology is a very, very, very relevant topic for what we are going through today, what all humans are going through today, correct? So 9.8 is very currently relevant topic. So we need to understand what does it mean by epidemiological anthropology, and also we need to understand the specific subtopics given under this. And in the context of how questions have come in the past, we try to plan our discussion on that. Otherwise, it's a big field, a lot of things can be discussed. But I think overall idea about what should come under our understanding of epidemiological anthropology, especially in the current scenario of pandemics, emerging pandemics like COVID-19. So it's very, very, very important. Okay, right. So where should we start? I think we'll start first of all talking about what is epidemiology, right? What do we study as part of the epidemiological anthropology? What does it mean by epidemiology? Okay, let's have a look at that first, and then we'll start defining what does it mean by healthy, and then we'll move on to different subtopics given here. Because if you see the subtopics here, they say health and disease. Subtopics given here are health and disease, and the next component is infectious and non-infectious diseases. So basically looking into the categories of diseases, infectious and non-infectious diseases after health and disease, and then nutritional deficiency diseases. Syllabus wise, it looks very brief. Specific dimensions are given here. Health and disease, infectious and non-infectious diseases, nutritional deficiency related diseases. But if you look into the specific types of questions that have been asked in the exam, I think we also need to look into the various factors, socio-cultural factors behind the spreading of diseases. And also I would like to add this one broad concept here of epidemiological transition that we are seeing in India. Okay, there was a theory related to that in general, and where India is standing, what is our current status with respect to the epidemiology. We are going to look into those aspects. So first, let me begin explaining what is epidemiology about. Okay, what do we study under this? What is the scope of it? Because usually on these type of topics, I'm seeing short note, either short note on ecological anthropology, short note on epidemiological anthropology, or specific, very defined questions are being asked. Okay. We look into those components as well. Okay. Okay. Let me share the presentation with you. So I'm sure this is one term that we have been hearing quite a bit since the beginning of COVID-19, correct? Even before that, of course, this term was very popular. But after COVID-19 emergence, I think it has become a very common term. Almost on everyday basis, you hear epidemiology in the newspapers. So what is this field about? So I would like to ask you a bit of idea that you probably have on this, starting with non-biology students. Any of you with no biology background can begin telling me what do you know about epidemiology? Sunil, Shweta, any one of you? What do you know about it? No pressure. Whatever you know about it. What comes to your mind when you hear about epidemiology? So ladies first. Shweta, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Shweta. What did you hear about this term? Are you familiar about this term?
No, sir.
No. Never heard about it?
No, sir.
Easy answer. No, not even heard. Saw in the newspapers.
I'm not able to recall it.
Okay. All right. What about you, Sunil?
Sir, basically, I know that epidemic is something which spreads really fast.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm relating to it. So it is to do with how it spreads and why it spreads, and
Okay.
and how it can affect the population, as
Good.
in general terms.
Very good. Very good. That's pretty good guess. Yes. Others, either Preeti or Vishal.
I think it's study of disease outbreaks and then
Study of disease
its
outbreak. Okay. So,
effects.
correct. Absolutely. So Preeti, do you want to add something to it?
The spread and control of the any disease.
Exactly. Various dynamics of a disease. Okay. Basically, it is something to do with the infections and diseases. That should be clear here, right? That is why I said with respect to the COVID-19, we probably are hearing quite a bit about this. Okay. Right. Let me explain that. Starting with kind of a definition of epidemiology that is given by John Last in 1988. So the epidemiology deals with study, distribution, and determinants of health and related states. So basically, infections, diseases, the study of a disease, and understanding how a disease or infection spreads, and what are the factors that determine the disease condition in a given population. And if you study all these components, understanding or figuring out how to control it, correct? All these aspects come under the concept of epidemiology. It is a field, okay, it's a branch of science where we deal with study. Study includes a lot of things. Origin, you want to know, like COVID-19, you want to know whether it really originated from Wuhan city, whether it originated in the laboratory or it is natural, came from other animals to us. So you look into the origin of the disease. Nowadays, lot of studies that you are hearing. I think yesterday, Science and Technology page on Hindu, they talked quite a bit about the COVID-19 mutation rate and hotspots for COVID-19 mutations. Correct. So what were they studying there? They were actually conducting epidemiological studies. They're trying to understand how disease causing agent is changing. So all these aspects come under what? Epidemiology, the study, distribution, and determinants of health-related states or infections and diseases in a given population, and the application of the studies in controlling such a problem is what is called epidemiology or epidemiological studies. Okay, so diseases can be of different types. We're going to talk about them. Okay, some of them caused by, just a brief idea, don't have to write these points. I'm going to actually again get into the details about it. Sometimes diseases happen because of internal factors, things that are going wrong inside the body, or sometimes it is because of the external factors, things that are present around us, maybe infectious agents, maybe temperature, maybe cold, lots of things. So some problems are because of the internal factors, some are because of the external. Sometimes it is both in combination. Okay, and epidemiology deals with etiological factors. Etiological factors refers to origin, probing the origin where probably the disease has started. So those type of components. So etiological factors involved in a disease incidence. Where did the disease come from? Like what I just mentioned to you about COVID-19. And emphasis on population variation in incidence and occurrence. Okay, and also understanding population variation, like are different populations are at the same risk or not. Within the population, do we see age related problems? COVID-19, we are hearing that people who are 60 or 70 or above have higher risk, and usually it's rarely that we see it that children are not as prone as the elderly people. Otherwise children don't have a very good or a very well developed immune system. They're also prone to a lot of diseases. That is why vaccination programs focus on children, but rarely you hear in cases of diseases like COVID-19 where children are more or less spared. First of all, we probably don't know enough of what type of problems it is causing, the COVID-19 causing, but definitely children are at lesser risk than people who are in the middle age, people who are in the elderly age seems to be at higher risk for COVID-19. Like that aspects. If population, initially they said that warmer countries may not actually experience too much of a problem with COVID-19 because it's like an influenza virus. So they thought it's like cold, flu. How does that affect normally, at higher extent or a higher rate in more colder countries than warmer countries? That is what people thought, but that was not the case. We were equally affected by COVID-19 as well. Like that, studying those aspects, population variation, incidence, occurrence rate, spread rate, if you're focusing on those things, then you definitely are studying epidemiological features of a disease. Okay, so understand the scope of the disease. When they say epidemiological anthropology, start with the definition. Start what aspects of the disease does epidemiological studies focus on. So can we call those things that I was mentioning to you, which were published in yesterday's SNT part of Hindu newspaper as epidemiological studies? They are part of the epidemiological studies. So what is the benefit? Let's understand about use of epidemiological studies. So I was already telling you this, to identify the etiology or cause of a disease and the risk factors. We are always interested, especially for the diseases which we didn't know. COVID-19 is new, just a year old story, which kind of shook the whole world. Correct? Over 215 countries had them. And such a case, we are curious to ask these questions. What is the cause? Where did this disease actually come from? A lot of political debates are also happening. America is very unhappy, or at least was unhappy about China because they thought it probably virus originated in Wuhan, viral laboratory, viral research laboratory in China. I don't think it is easy to prove whether it really originated there, but you see a different dimensions to this problem. It's not just about how much are we affected from that, but it is also about politically what type of steps that people have taken, what type of rivalry. So it has impact on lots of different levels. You know it very well. Socio-economic status of people is drastically changed after COVID-19, especially people who are daily workers, for example, they are drastically affected by the occurrence of COVID-19. Their livelihood basically got affected. So I think every area got hugely affected by it. Maybe a few areas I think that are kind of benefited is healthcare sector, in the sense vaccines, medicines, antibiotics. So those that normally used against the flu, I think they probably made enough money. Are people who are making PPE kits, face masks, sanitizers. Some probably people, some business have probably advantage, but otherwise most of the areas are shook by this industry, which shook by this disease, right? So before getting into the details, because I keep using this word, I just want you to know that if I'm using the word infection disease, is there a difference? Are they both mean the same? Or is there a difference between the words infection and disease? Any one of you. Is there a difference between infection and a disease? Preeti, Vishal, Shweta.
Infection may transfer from one person to another, and disease might not spread from one to other.
Okay. Okay. Right. So, but disease is also a general term. Some diseases you can call AIDS a disease. Also
Yes.
correct. Okay. There is some truth to what you said, but there is another major difference there. Vishal or Preeti, what's the difference between an infection and a disease? Who is first? Vishal? Are they both mean the same? No, you are muted. Can you unmute yourself, Vishal?
Yeah, I don't think they both mean the same.
Okay. So what's the difference?
Infection is the, I would say it's a more localized thing.
All right.
It may or may not, both may or may not spread. So disease, I'm taking this inference from the last time we discussed about disorder. Disorder, you said it's more complex, it's about complexity. So I
Yes,
think disease is something that is not very complex.
Okay, actually, the difference is very simple. Let me explain that. Probably you have not thought about it enough. So infection, let's say we say, look at the examples: TB infection, malarial infection, bacterial infection, viral infection. So we're talking about an infectious agent, a microorganism or a pathogen entering into our body, causing the problem, initiating the problem is infection. It is very infectious disease, meaning it does cause infection, can spread easily. A disease can be used for non-communicable, communicable diseases. Some diseases are communicable, which are transferable, transmittable, or some are non-communicable diseases, right? Disease is a common term, but the difference seems to be infection is probably the initial stage when infection is happening. Disease is the established stage where you start noticing the effect of it. Like TB infection, TB disease. Is there a difference between these two words? Infection mostly referring to the initial stages of the process, whereas TB disease means an established state of that condition where a disease happened, your lungs started experiencing the problem, you are coughing, so your lungs got damaged or at least in the process of damage. So the infectious agent and the condition has interfered in the normal functioning of the body. That is called a disease condition. So disease condition in general sense is a later stage. Infection is the initial stage. Disease stage is where established state of the disease, where you start experiencing the problem. Lung disease. Infection had spread. You are experiencing, you are having difficulty in breathing. Kidney disease, you have difficulty in maintaining the normal, blood urea levels or normal creatinine levels. So clinically, what we can notice, correct, like that. Heart diseases, you start having issue in pumping blood. So like that, disease condition is more established in later condition. So infection doesn't have to lead to disease, but infection is definitely the initial stage of a disease. So when we are using the words, I think most of the times interchangeably we are using the words. We don't really mean at that given point whether we are talking about infection or a disease, because most of the times there is not much difference that we need to worry about. It's an infectious process. It is established, causing problem. This is what we think. Okay, right. So identifying the etiology of the cause of the disease and risk factors associated with it, what age people are at risk, okay, and any food factors, malnutrition, these type of things, do they cause problem? So those type of things that we need to worry about. Next, to study the natural history and prognosis of a disease, and also we want to study the few components. I think it kind of fits again into the first statement itself, is the history. Where did it actually originated? So, and how does it spread, and what stage is it? How severe or less severe? So those components we study under the history and prognostic part of a disease. Right? Basically, we are trying to understand the specific dimensions of the disease. Okay, right. So epidemiological studies helps us figuring out these components. History, again, origin and prognosis. So disease trend, how does disease will move or will spread? So those components we'll look into, and to evaluate new models of healthcare delivery. So if this is how the disease is, how should we handle it? What happened? We talked about quarantining, isolating people. We talked about having proper hygienic conditions. So washing hands more frequently, right, with soap, and using alcohol-based sprays, for example, sanitizers, all sorts of things. So we actually came up with an idea. So how to deal with it, how to stop the spread, and then figure out how to treat it, how to prevent it, right? So we can actually come out of with these ideas when epidemiological studies happen. And to provide a scientific foundation for regulatory decisions relating to health or environmental problems. Okay, also we need that understanding in order to make decisions, make plans of what needs to be controlled and how this needs to be controlled. So during the quarantine period or during the lockdown period in India, people got time to think, especially the regulatory bodies got some time to understand its dynamics. And we started dealing it with it little better indeed after the lockdown period. So lockdown is not a solution to that, but lockdown was mostly meant for buying us time to understand it. Especially when disease started and spread from other countries to us, we already seeing the phases at more extreme rates in other countries, so that we could learn from them. Okay, right. And to provide a clue to changes taking place over time, so lots of dynamics basically we can study here to identify subgroups in the population who are at high risk for disease. So these are more specific things, but I think key ideas we already got here. How does disease started, and how does it spread? What is its prognosis, or the state at which it actually moves ahead, and the risk factors associated with it, subgroups in a population who are at higher risk, right? And the knowledge based or information driving us forward in dealing with the disease. That is what happens when we get more and more insight related to the infection through epidemiological studies. Okay. And as part of the handling the disease, like if the disease is spreading through, like now we know COVID is droplet infection. Some people might have even suggested that it's airborne infection. So we know it actually has to enter through the nose or mouth. We started covering the nose and mouth, right? If it is, it's a mosquito-borne disease, what do? We ensure that mosquitoes are probably killed. Are we avoiding them by using nets or mosquito repellents? Like that, if knowing how disease actually spreading is very, very useful to us, because prevention process at a record rate, we actually produced vaccines this time. This is, I think, probably the fastest in human history to make vaccines. So that the time taking. So meanwhile, we started actually covering our mouths and nose so that we won't let or inhale that pathogen containing material. Okay, like that. Also treatment options. So all sorts of things. And economically, we found out who is mostly affected, what type of economic packages are required for them. So even political aspects are defined by these epidemiological studies. Okay, right. So this is kind of the scope of what is epidemiological study, what does it deal with. Okay, next I would like to introduce few terms to you. I hope you got the idea about what is epidemiology and what is the use or benefit of epidemiological studies. Okay, read if you want, I can give you articles on this. I actually am reading Cell article published I think a few months ago in the very prestigious journal Cell, where they are talking about emerging diseases, emerging pandemics. COVID-19, they also have a great amount of information on what diseases, what infections have come when. Some factual data, but a good flow of information. If you're interested, I'll share some of these articles with you just for the additional reading. But I'm already defining what is required for the exam here. Understanding what is epidemiology, what is the scope of epidemiology, few terms that are used in epidemiology, and then as given in the syllabus, defining health and disease, infections, non-infectious, and nutrition-based problems is what the focus. Where possible, we'll put the anthropological aspect to it, like cultural, social factors resulting in the spread of diseases. We'll also put a little bit of emphasis on them. So we also understand social disease in the context, in the social context, basically. Okay, right. So endemic, epidemic, and pandemics, the terms that you frequently hear, right? So I'll first listen to me carefully. You probably already have an idea. Can anyone briefly tell me what is the difference between endemic and epidemic? Very generic term, that's enough. Don't have to read anything here. Preeti? Can you explain the difference between endemic and epidemic?
So endemic is something that is permanent, like in a population, and epidemic, so, that spreads through the
Okay.
people.
Right. So idea is, yes, you're right.
And pandemic is like in many of the areas of the world when it spreads.
Global spread, basically. Yes, your idea is right. Look at the terms. Endemic. Endo means what? Endo. Endo means inside. Limited to a given area. So there are two ways that you can describe it. Endemic, a disease that more or less seen in a given population. So one aspect, as Preeti mentioned, something that is routinely seen or commonly seen in the given area. Like malaria is common to several regions in Africa, right? So malaria is an endemic problem to these regions of Africa, you hear. What does it mean? It's more or less seen there. In other words, it means endo means localized. It is more or less seen in a given region. So it is more or less restricted to a given region, or a small area is affected in a given country. In that sense, endo, it's limited to an endemic region, okay, a defined, well-defined region. Or in other sense, it is permanently seen in that region, like malaria being very common in some African countries. Okay, so that is endemic. Epi means what? Epi moving away, moving out, or surroundings. So endo means inside, epi means outside. So infection or disease moving from that region where it is usually localized to other regions, starting to spread. Nifa initially we have seen in India in Kerala, started spreading to Tamil Nadu, Karnataka. Then in that sense we call it an epidemic disease, a disease that is in the process of spreading to the other places, other surrounding places. Bird flu, we have been hearing in the news lately that bird flu started spreading around. So COVID-19 also started like that. Okay, it was of course not endemic. It was never an endemic. It suddenly started. It became an epidemic. Rapidly started, spreading to the neighboring places. Eventually, it started showing global presence. It started moving to various countries. That is where we call it pandemic. Pan means global, all, everywhere. Pan. So pandemic. It started showing its global presence. That is when epidemic becomes pandemic. HIV is pandemic. I think the best example for pandemic now is COVID-19. SARS-CoV-2 infection caused by SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19 is the pandemic that we are seeing today. So do you see the difference now? Endemic, epidemic, and pandemic usually refer to the infectious diseases, but rarely, I think they are used for, I think more less like in the literary sense they use the word pandemic, epidemic, but otherwise normally used to describe the infectious agents and spread of infectious diseases, right? So endemic, epidemic, pandemic. Okay, so presence, basically based on the presence. Endo means limited, epidemic means starting to spread, outbreaks are beginning, pandemic means global spread, already happened, already spread around the world. Okay. Excuse me. Next. Yeah. Next, I would like to, I think, before getting into more details, how is health defined? What does it mean by healthy? How is health defined?
Sir, from the previous slide,
Yeah.
can there be also a situation where like a rural area where it is not localized to a rural area, but then it is not also spreading so fast? So in something not that is covered in endemic and epidemic and endemic,
You may
can
not
there?
use the word endemic epidemics there. You start saying that a new infection has emerged or noticed in these areas. Don't prefer to use the words like this. Like for malaria, you prefer to use the word endemic. This is an endemic disease in Africa. Cholera is an endemic disease, let's say in Asian countries like India. So like that, endemic is the word which is used to tell something that is more common or more restricted. Or any infection which is spreading, you start saying epidemic. Correct. So you don't have to use these words in case if it's just something that newly emerged and it is not common to that area. Then you don't have to use the word endemic. Instead, say a new infection or a newly emerging infection.
Sir, in one of the articles I had also read about the nature of transmission, say one person to one person, then it becomes endemic, or so how a pandemic becomes an endemic. So in a pandemic, one person may be transmitting to multiple people,
And
but
that becomes,
then
yeah, go ahead.
when you come down, when the infection rates decrease, it becomes an epidemic and then endemic, where it is only present in localized areas where one person to one person or less.
Right. I think as we are seeing the course of infection at the moment, COVID-19 infection, it was an started with a local area and started quickly spreading and it became epidemic, then pandemic. Then what happens over a period of time, our body responds to it, or we starting to take the actions like interferences, basically in the spread of the disease. Technological interventions take place, so they eventually result in these type of kind of disease being cut down in terms of number of instances that we see. Correct. So yes, endemics can become epidemics, and epidemics can become pandemic, and they can come back because of all these steps that we normally take, or even our immune system gaining resistance to the infectious agent. There are many examples that I'm going to show you, like when certain diseases like TB got introduced into certain islands. Many people died initially, but later, what happened? They got resistant. They got some amount of resistance to that. So like that, these dynamics do change, and endemic may starting to become epidemic and pandemic and vice versa. Okay, this can happen. You're right. So those are defined by a lot of complex interplays. And it's not just how fast is infection spreading, how well are we prepared, how is our body, our immune system is responding to it. A lot of these factors are important here. Okay. Um, so what does it mean by healthy? How do you define, the status of health of an individual? So if I ask you this question, when do you say that you are healthy?
When all the levels are in optimum range,
All the levels of what? What level?
uh, uh, core parameters, maybe say pulse rate,
Some vitals, for
vitals.
example, if they are actually showing the normal range, so you tend to say you're healthy. Okay, right? So, but mostly, so what I'm trying to say, your body is behaving normally. in the measurable sense. Correct? So no diseases has happened to you, no infection or no disease you are going through. That means you probably are healthy. Correct? Okay. Anything else to be added to that? Anyone of you want to add anything to it?
Sir, I feel it is more of a psychological, has to do with psychology. If, a person, if he feels that he is healthy, even though he is suffering from something, if he is healthy, then he won't go anywhere to doctor or something.
Okay, so there's also psychological component you're trying to say to the disease. Right? Okay, right. In this direction, let me actually show you the IGNO material. IGNO material is something that I think we're going to use as a reference material for this. Along with that, I'm going to use one or two textbook chapters, a brief idea, just a different dimensions to the same concept. So in addition to what I'm discussing, I'm explaining the core concepts, examples, I'm providing you the explanation. At the same time, I'll provide you a bit of reading on this. Straightforward, I think the material that we are going to refer to is the IGNOS material on this that I'm going to show you, which briefly explains about the concept of health and how health has to be defined. Okay, so health means most of the times we tend to think that free from infection. So when you are free from infection, that you are not going through any particular infection or not infected by any agent, well-known agent, then you think that you are healthy. Correct? No need to take any medication. You are all right. That is what we normally think about, right? But health means something more than that. Okay, here is IGNO material that I'm going to share with you. So they briefly talked about the epidemiological aspects we already discussed. Okay, and in a general sense, when we talk about a person to be healthy refers to one who is not only physically well, so free from infections, but also socially and mentally doing equally well. So social well-being, mental well-being, as well as the physical well-being of an individual is defined to be his health status. The person is healthy means his physically and his social well-being and mental well-being is also maintained well. In that sense, it is considered to be healthy. This is a WHO definition, World Health Organization definition on health. Okay, even if you read class 12th NCRT book for this, class 12th NCRT book, they discuss the same definition on this, that they say that it is a physical, mental, and social well-being. What defines health of an individual? Physical, mental, and social well-being of an individual. Okay, you agree with it? So we tend to consider that physical well-being is all right, but sometimes there are hidden components. Let's say even for the UPSC aspirants, your mental well-being, social well-being is not all right. Would you consider yourself healthy? Let's say that you don't mingle very well with people, you don't talk about your issues, you cannot take out your stress, okay, because you're afraid, or you are a little bit insecure, or you're not outgoing. There can be different factors that make you not talk to people, but that may build up issues, stress factors with you. Many people actually take extreme steps sometimes because they don't get to talk to others. So their mental well-being is very important. The social well-being is very important. Correct? You are not able to focus. Very simple concept. You want to read, but you cannot sit down. You cannot focus. So would that help you in succeeding in this condition? You probably don't have an infection or a disease condition, but what happens? You're not able to, deal with that situation. You're not able to perform well in what you're supposed to do. So these conditions could also affect us greatly, right? Nowadays, for every condition that you probably don't know the reason, doctors tend to tell that probably stress factor is an important factor. The stress is killing us. This is what we frequently hear, right? You have no infection, but the stress is something that is building up. You're not able to handle it. Your social well-being and your mental well-being both are affected because of that stress factor. But they can also be in very integral components in defining health. Right? So keep these three things in mind: physical, mental, and social well-being are parts of the definition of, as per the WHO definition. Okay, right. So next we'll move on to talking about, I think I'll first briefly give you an idea about the difference between infectious and non-infectious diseases. And then we'll move on talking about where did infections come from, what are the origin of infections, what are the different dynamics that you see, are our responses, are cultural factors, social factors behind it, are evolutionary factors behind causing a disease. Okay, but before getting into those specifics, because sometimes we may pick factors which are suitable for both infectious and non-infectious disease. But let me first explain what is the difference between infectious and non-infectious disease, which is probably not something that new to you, right? So the difference between infectious and non-infectious that you probably are well aware about is infectious means something that spreads, and in non-infectious means something that doesn't spread from person to person. Okay, so if you meet a person who is going through that infection, he may not transmit that to you. Correct? Such a diseases are called non-infectious or non-communicable diseases. Correct? So infectious diseases are diseases caused mainly, are diseases that can spread either directly from person to person or through some physical components that I'm going to explain you. Physical or biological components, not physical, biotic components we can call. Maybe mosquitoes, maybe air, maybe water. Some components can actually spread the problem. Correct? Those diseases that can spread from one to another are called infectious diseases. Infectious diseases. So they're transmitted from one person to another, maybe animals to humans, whatsoever. So they transmit from one, they have that key feature of spreading. Those diseases are infectious diseases. They're transmitted from one to another, either through direct contact or through some medium. Direct contact, physical touch, or through medium, air. Air is carrying the infectious agent, like kind of what we're seeing for COVID-19 now. Water, waterborne infections, right? Remember the examples. You need some factual data as well here to discuss. So airborne infections, TB, for example, flu, and of course we don't call COVID-19 infection as an airborne infection, although there is a debate on that. It's mostly considered to be droplet. Do you know the difference between droplet infection and airborne infection?
The droplet, the vector or the vector travels in the medium of, say, liquid in the form of tiny drops, whereas in air, the medium could just, without any, say, extra support, it can travel by itself. Say, for example, anthrax,
Right.
it can just uh, transmit through air.
Right. So Preeti, do you want to add something to it? Okay. Right. So droplet infection is basically something that is a bit heavier. Like when you cough, when you sneeze, droplets that actually comes from out of our mouth or nose, they carry the infectious agents in them. But they tend to be a bit heavier. They actually settle down faster. They don't travel much. So if you're in a room, but there's enough distance between two people, that is why for COVID-19 infection, they say, initially they said 3 feet distance, now they're saying 6 feet distance. Maintaining those 2 meter distance is enough because the droplets won't reach the other person. So droplet infections we're talking about where these are material that packed with the infectious agent, but is heavier, denser. What happens? It actually tends to settle down. It doesn't travel much. But as Vishal was rightly saying, the airborne infection is more lighter, can easily spread around. So tiny particles can also carry it. Normally, I think the cutoff they say is 5 microns. If it is above 5 microns, okay, so it is more like a droplet infection. If it is below 5 microns, meaning tiny particles also spread around, they also can carry pathogens with it. So in those cases, it becomes airborne disease. So in a way, airborne and droplet infections are related, but droplet infection is more limited to the closer distances. So it doesn't spread to the people in the same room, but far away. Okay, enough at least a few meters of difference, the distance that they maintain, then they probably are all right. Right, we have to wait and see. I think it looks like mostly droplet infection, but if it is airborne infection, I think more and more people would have affected, especially in the dense populations like in India. There are instances where I think not every person in the family, one single family has infected. So they clearly indicate that it could be probably more like a droplet infection than airborne. I think only time will tell us because experimental conditions, it looks like an airborne infection as well. But I think it's difficult to get convinced logically. Okay? Right. So what else we need to know? So transmit like this air, water, vector-borne diseases. Can you give me examples of vector-borne diseases?
Malaria.
Malaria. Very good.
Malaria.
Mosquito-borne disease. Malaria is transmitted by mosquitoes, Anopheles mosquitoes. Those type of diseases. Examples. Be aware. And the next slide, I'm going to show you briefly the examples of diseases. Once I finish explaining about infectious, non-infectious diseases. The next question is what factors do cause infectious diseases? We talked about how they spread. So mostly it is extrinsic factors, factors that can come from outside the body. So mostly microorganisms, pathogens cause infectious diseases. Various forms of infectious agents cause diseases in us. Such as you can look into few categories of infectious agents. Can you name some of them? What are the common infectious agents?
Bacteria, virus,
Bacteria, virus, what else?
protozoa.
Protozoan, fungi, parasites. Okay, these type of things. Sometimes I've seen that they may ask a specific category of agent. Once I've seen a question like that. Okay, so some of them, be aware. I have an example for a couple of examples for each of these categories briefly, how they spread and how basically like what type of infections they are, bacterial, viral, right, and protozoan and fungal. Like for example, bacterial diseases. So many examples are there. Like cholera. Cholera is a bacterial disease, right? Can you name few of those names for me? Cholera is a bacterial disease. Can you name few other bacterial disease? Pick one each. Shweta, can you name one bacterial disease other than cholera? Any bacterial disease. Anything of your favorite. You have any favorite bacterial disease? No? Okay, all right. I'll give you time. I'll come back to you. Sunil, seems like you already have one in your mind.
I read it. It's tetanus.
Tetanus. Okay, all right. That's all. You
So
cheated.
is typhoid is bacterial?
Typhoid is bacteria.
I don't know.
You don't know. Yes, typhoid is bacterial disease. Salmonella typhi. Right. Vishal, college students, I want you to give 3 infections now.
I think tuberculosis is one,
Exactly. TB is one, which I already mentioned. Okay, next.
and
So you got cholera, tetanus, typhoid, TB. Are we short of diseases? This is a very important topic for your SNT part of the exam, right?
I've just recently read, sir, different disease types.
Can you recollect more? Preeti, are you there?
Yes, sir. Syphilis and anthrax also.
Syphilis and what is the other one?
Anthrax.
Sorry, I could not get that. Can someone?
Anthrax.
She's anthrax.
Okay, fine. Yes, yes, anthrax is also bacterial disease. You are right. Correct. Right. Okay. Yes, I'll give you the list of them. Okay. So cholera, typhoid, and tetanus. We have something called a vaccine called DPT vaccine. You heard about DPT? Triple antigen vaccine, good for diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus. 3 of them are bacterial diseases. Otherwise, well-known diseases like leprosy is a bacterial disease. Okay, TB is of course well known. Pneumonia usually put under bacteria, but also can also be caused by some viruses. It can also be caused by or transmitted by some viruses. But usually the main cause of this is Streptococcus pneumoniae, right? So, but otherwise, even COVID-19, they say it causes pneumonia-like symptoms, correct? But a main agent is bacterial agent. Like that, many of these agents. Also, syphilis. Syphilis is a sexually transmitted disease, another form of disease spread. Because I was mentioning to you airborne diseases. Some diseases spread through air. So, which of the examples from this in bacterial diseases are airborne diseases? Can you give me one example from this? An airborne disease from the list. I already told you one, leaving that out. TB is an airborne disease. Always remember, when you're talking about airborne means something that has to enter through the nose or mouth, through air, correct? So most of the times, what part of the body does it affect? If it is going through the airways, respiratory
Throat,
system.
throat and lungs. Yeah.
Correct. Throat, mostly respiratory system. Throat, for example, pharynx, larynx, and also lungs. So think about lung infections or infections that actually affect the throat in this area. So those ones are the airborne infections. Right? So you can think about the pneumonia is definitely lung infection. So TB, pneumonia, something like tetanus. So these type of infectious agents can spread like that. Okay. So I have a couple of examples. Anthrax also very well known airborne infection, Bacillus anthracis. So some of these agents are airborne infections.
Even the bacteria's name is also important.
When the bacteria?
Even the name of the bacteria is important to remember, or
No, not necessarily. Maybe one couple of them be familiar about. Like TB, tuberculosis, you hear quite a bit about it. Mycobacterium tuberculosis, remember that. If you want typhi, Salmonella typhi. So a couple of them. COVID-19, anyway, you remember SARS-CoV-2, right? So we have no choice there. But a couple of names. I don't think you have to mention the names of it because they're not asking a specific disease. Talk about a couple of diseases. So it's bacterial diseases like typhoid, cholera, TB are common problems like that. To cite examples, basically. Okay, right. This is about the bacterial scenario, but we talked about airborne, like that waterborne sexually transmitted disease also we need to know. So especially the waterborne or a foodborne disease. How does that spread? Waterborne, foodborne, so goes through the water or contaminated food. Usually discussed it together. So it has to enter, what part does it enter into lungs or other parts of the body? If it is going through the food or water, it gets into what system?
stomach, digestive system.
Digestive system. So stomach related issues, diarrhea,
Sir, which disease is being discussed?
sorry.
Which disease is being discussed?
No,
Waterborne,
just
water
talking
and
about
foodborne.
examples. I'm just talking about bacterial diseases. Okay, just picking a few examples of bacterial diseases. So here I'm talking about airborne diseases are those that spread through the air, mostly affect the lungs. Like TB is a good example for that, or anthrax is a good example for that. Similarly, foodborne and waterborne infections. So they affect the stomach. Those symptoms that cause diarrhea like symptoms, for example. So food poisoning we normally hear about. So those type of problems. I think one example here is botulism. Clostridium botulinum causes this botulism, food poisoning that happens in people. Or even salmonella, E. coli, salmonella. We normally hear in the news meat that is imported from so and so country carried salmonella infection in that. Correct. Meat normally contaminated with salmonella can also cause infections. Salmonella, E. coli, so botulism. These type of infectious agents cause waterborne and foodborne diseases. Another very well-known waterborne disease is typhoid. Typhoid, contaminated water. We normally get it through the typhoid, through this. There is one more, not bacterial disease, but a very well-known protozoan disease called amoebiasis. Amoebic dysentery or amoebiasis is a well-known waterborne and foodborne disease. Those type of things. Okay, that is about bacterial infections and a briefly idea about different forms in which they spread. What about viral diseases? Same thing we'll do. Give example of viral diseases, each of you. There's so many in the news. Go ahead.
HIV/AIDS, Nipah, then I think Ebola.
Right. Shweta, any viral diseases?
I'll take time.
Okay, sure. You pass it. Okay, right. Sunil.
COVID-19.
See, got the easiest one. You have to take the first chance. It's actually much easier to say few diseases, right? I'll give you clues. Like, did you see the prelims exam, prelims paper, last year prelims paper, 2019, 2020 paper, right? What question was asked? The question was asked on a disease, Nobel Prize winning disease. Last year, Nobel Prize went to that disease. Hepatitis C, Hep C, correct? They also asked the question comparison between HIV and hepatitis. Correct? Okay, right. So many diseases are there. I think hepatitis are well-known infections. Otherwise, rabies, polio drops, I think, were given recently in India. So polio is a viral disease. Rabies is a viral disease. Even flu that we get, like COVID-19, they belong to influenza categories of viruses, more specifically coronaviruses. Right? Mumps, measles, rubella, MMR vaccine, have you heard? Very much like DPT vaccine for bacteria. MMR vaccine, mumps, measles, rubella vaccine. Vaccine against viral diseases, these three diseases. So that polio is known, hepatitis is known, smallpox, all pox viruses. Smallpox, chicken pox, cow pox. They are also viral diseases. Okay. And a lot of new diseases. Nipah, Zika, chikungunya, dengue, Ebola, right? Hantavirus you heard in China after COVID-19, even before that. KFDV, Casanova forest disease virus in Karnataka. So range of these agents, okay, viral diseases. Have some knowledge about this. Is actually equally important for your SNT part plus anthropology part. Anthropology part, few examples are enough for you. Just to pick the right ones. Don't make mistakes. Pick the one. HIV, big problem, pandemic, or COVID-19, current issue. Okay, pick up those examples. Swine flu, bird flu, Japanese encephalitis. So range of infectious agents. Okay, write down 3-4 examples. Okay, maybe some of them also you want you to know about how do they spread as well. HIV, what type of a disease is HIV? What does it come under? Airborne, waterborne, or foodborne? Toxin-mediated disease, sexually transmitted disease. Options I'll give options.
Sexually transmitted.
STD, right? Very well known. Syphilis, gonorrhea, and AIDS are very well known sexually transmitted diseases. Know those common examples for them. Okay, and rabies, zoonotic disease, comes from like animals like dogs to us, right? And this category of diseases like chikungunya, dengue, Zika, what is common to them? How do they spread?
Vector-borne.
Vector-borne, mosquito-borne diseases. And indeed, they actually are transmitted by same categories of mosquitoes. Aedes mosquitoes, AEDES, Aedes mosquitoes. Aedes mosquitoes what are responsible for transmitting chikungunya, dengue, and Zika. They only transmit the problem. They carry the pathogen which caused the problem. They don't cause the problem, they spread the problem. Correct? That is why they're called vectors. They are vector-borne diseases, mainly mosquito-borne diseases, Aedes mosquitoes. The next one, Japanese encephalitis, JE, is also mosquito-borne or vector-borne disease, Culex, but a different mosquito called Culex. Different mosquito called Culex. Okay, like that, hepatitis A is a waterborne disease. For example, hepatitis A. Hepatitis B also transmit through sexually or through the blood contamination, whereas hepatitis A is a foodborne or a waterborne disease. Like that range of diseases, the way they spread also is important here. So I've given examples of bacterial diseases, viral diseases, and well-known examples of protozoan diseases. I think you know very well. I think we kind of already discussed that. Malaria. Malaria is a protozoan disease. It is protozoan disease. Transmitted through mosquitoes, right? Anopheles mosquitoes, female anopheles mainly. female Anopheles mosquitoes. Don't male mosquitoes actually spread malaria? Why is there gender discrimination here? Looks like only female mosquitoes transmit malaria. Why not male mosquitoes? Any idea?
I'm not really sure, but I think they don't suck on blood, is what I've.
That they're vegetarians. In a way, if I have to tell in a funny way, they actually survive on plant juices, for example. They don't suck the blood. Their mouth parts are designed like that in nature. Okay, so yes, female Anopheles mosquitoes do spread malaria like that. Many other protozoan diseases are there. I think another example I told you is amoebiasis. Amoebiasis. Amoebic dysentery or amoebiasis is also a protozoan disease. Not sure if I have them on the list. Yes, I have. Amoebic dysentery, amoebiasis, which spreads through contaminated drinking water. Amoebiasis, and malaria through Anopheles mosquitoes. Similarly, some examples that I think used to be very common in the exams before, like sleeping sickness, which is called trypanosomiasis or African sleeping sickness, caused by trypanosoma and transmitted by flies called CC flies. The way malaria gets transmitted through Anopheles mosquitoes, sleeping sickness or African sleeping sickness are also called trypanosomiasis. Trypano, as you see the name here, trypanosoma it is caused by, and the disease is called trypanosomiasis. MIASIS, somiasis. Transmitted by not mosquito but a fly. It's called CC fly. Trypanosoma, CC fly, same first letter, if you want to remember. Similarly, Kala-Azar as black fever, it is called, caused by Leishmania donovani. That is called Leishmaniasis. Leishmania or Leishmaniasis, Kala-Azar, transmitted through sand flies, another category of flies called sand flies. Seen in some states like Bihar, for example. We are trying to eradicate this problem, but we didn't succeed in it yet. Few cases are seen here and there. Otherwise, we are actually working hard to, or at least hoping that we're working hard to eliminate Kala-Azar from India. Right? Okay. So these are some protozoan examples. So most of them either they are transmitted through vectors, some of them through the water, contaminated drinking water, etc. Fungal diseases also, we probably have some examples with you, like ringworm infections. We hear in the advertisements, right? Itch guard example we hear. It's to treat ringworm infections, mostly topical problem, meaning skin infections. External parts of the body gets affected here, right? So you may have some rashes on the body, on your face, on the chin. People, even dandruff is said to be caused because of fungal agents, maybe even bacterial agents. But some fungi can also is considered to be the causative agent of dandruff as well. Like mostly skin problem. Some people actually develop some sort of rashes on the beard, so that is because of the fungal infection, and especially in the genital areas, especially where moisture gets trapped, is also a spot where fungal infections normally show up. Mostly on the top of the body, okay, but rarely they can show up in the mouth, like white patches in the mouth. Some people see it, or sometimes rarely it enters into the body, like lung infections. They can cause, but rare. Mostly the external infections are caused by fungi. Okay, so candidiasis, ringworm infections, and athlete's foot is also kind of example for this, like where people actually have moisture being trapped, so resulting in this type of fungal infection. There's a bit of warmth and moisture are the best conditions for fungus to grow. We know it very well. Leave the food outside. In a day or two, what happens? Starting to rot it. That is because of fungal infections. Okay, fungus starting to eat it up. And you'll see fungal, the soft, mat-like growth you see on the breads, rhizopus, right? So they can, with a little bit of warmth, a little bit of moisture, they can grow on the food easily. Even in the refrigerators, you start noticing them, right? So like that, diseases caused by fungus, there are some examples. Like that also we have a parasitic worms like Taenia solium, schistosomiasis. We do hear about some parasites. People, children playing in the soil, for example, they tend to ingest some small parasites, worms. What happens? They can enter into the stomach and starting to cause digestive related issues in them, right? So teniasis, it is called Taenia solium, like that. There are categories of infectious agents like this, and this is how they spread. So know the specific factors as I was telling you like this. So infectious diseases, this is a brief idea about infectious diseases with examples. Okay, so what type of way that these communicable diseases spread? I think I kind of already told you majority of this information. They go from the source of the infection. Sometimes we call them reservoirs. So we get COVID-19 from, it is we believe that it's coming from bats to us. SARS virus, MERS virus seems to be coming from, a source like a bat. So probably this agent has evolved in them, and then eventually we got in contact with those animals or reservoirs in which they tend to multiply. So they don't get the infection, actual infection, but infectious agent multiplies in them. That is called reservoir. It acting like a reservoir, a storage source for it. Humans. So zoonotic infections means those that come from animals to us. So zoonotic infections are on rise. We are hearing quite a bit about infections going from animals to us. Zoonotic. Okay. Right. Sometimes inanimate objects, maybe on the towel, maybe on the bench, something like that. Things can fall, can spread to you. How do they spread? As I was telling you, direct or indirect. Direct by touch. Indirect, maybe airborne, vectors, inanimate objects, water. So those ways. Okay. Finally, they reach the humans, causing the problem. For most of this, you don't need too much of explanation, but just you need to know the idea here. In the IGNOS material, they talked slightly differently on this. They said different ecological aspects spreading the disease. They said physical parts, biotic parts. That's how they divided. You can also follow this method. They said physical parts. Sometimes it is the temperature, moisture, right? Some of these components cause problems. Most of the times, they're not necessarily the infectious ones. Because let's say you get heat stroke. You are spending time in the temperature. Probably went for a trip to desert. So what happens? You start experiencing heat stroke. You don't even have to go there, right? In the deep summers, if you come to Hyderabad, we experience it, right? So the like temperature, external factors like that. So this is part of physical environment. Mountain sickness we talked about, high altitude regions, physical environment. So those type of problems. UV exposure to UV can cause some sort of ulcers or cancer, skin cancers are possible when we are exposed to UV light. Smoke, air pollution. So these are all physical environment around us. Which of them, which usually define or cause non-communicable diseases to us, correct? Or they may increase sensitivity to communicable diseases. Like if you are more and more, you are a smoker, for example, or you are an alcohol, some diseases are more common. COVID-19 infection can bother us more if you have the habit of smoking, for example. So some external factors can increase the sensitivity to the given infection. But otherwise, mostly when we talked about internal factors, we are referring to biotic components, like living components around us. So mostly what are we referring to here? Pathogens like bacteria, viruses, protozoa, fungi. If you are comfortable, use the word biotic components in case of infectious diseases. Okay, I'm going to share this document with you that you can read. Okay. So this is about the communicable disease. Briefly, I'll come back to the factors. Okay. Let me now briefly talk to you about the non-infectious. So what are non-infectious? In a way, opposite to the infectious. They don't spread from person to person. You cannot give these diseases to others. So they're not infections. They're non-infectious. So not caused by pathogens. If it is because of pathogens you can spread. Correct. But it's not because of pathogens. It's because of intrinsic factors. Factors that are within you. May also be environmental factors. Okay. But in the sense that it could be the problems that are happening to the internal parts of the body or the response to the external stimuli. Those diseases are called non-infectious. They do not get transmitted from one person to another. Such diseases are non-infectious, non-communicable. You cannot communicate the disease to others, meaning you cannot spread the disease to others. So they are non-communicable diseases caused mainly due to internal factors, sometimes interplay between internal and physical factors, environmental factors. Okay, so no pathogens involvement you see in them. And some diseases, like can you name examples of non-infectious diseases where we have those diseases commonly in India, but we don't spread them from person to person? Maybe psychologically, but physically you don't.
Jaundice.
Okay, jaundice. Jaundice is a symptom indeed. Mostly it can happen because of multiple factors, like including alcohol consumption. But hepatitis infections can also cause jaundice.
Diabetes.
Yes, diabetes or sugar we sometimes call diabetes. You don't get diabetes from your friends or family, right? Because some genetic components are there, but you don't spread the problem like that. So diabetes, very good. What else?
Sickle
Heart
cell
diseases.
anemia.
What did you say?
Sickle cell anemia.
Genetic diseases, genetic disorders. Sickle cell anemia, hemophilia, they run in families. Hereditary diseases, we call them, right? Hereditary diseases or genetic diseases. They run in families mostly because of mutations or other abnormalities in genetic material. So this is run in families. Example is sickle cell anemia, hemophilia, etc. And Vishal, what were you telling?
I was saying heart diseases.
Heart problems, right? Like ischemia, for example, or heart diseases that happen because of the blockage of blood vessels that are taking blood to heart. Common form of this problem, correct? Blood vessels being kind of blocked by cholesterol mainly. Any other diseases, Shweta? Do you want to add one disease to this?
The thyroid.
Thyroid problems, and hormonal disorders, thyroid problem, growth hormone problem, etc. Any other dangerous disease that can also be caused due to exposure to UV, like physical factor like UV?
Cancer.
Cancer, absolutely cancer. So diabetes, heart problems, hormonal issues, genetic problems, cancer, arthritis, pain in joints. If you go to visit your friend or friend's grandmother, if they have joint pains, do you also get joint pains from them? The next moment you may start feeling that you probably have joint pain as well psychologically, but maybe you don't, right? Okay. Autoimmune diseases, autoimmune problems like type 1 diabetes and Graves disease, Hashimoto's disease. It's mainly caused because our immune system attacks our own tissues. Right? So those diseases, autoimmune diseases, I think we kind of briefly talked about them before. So these are all the examples for non-communicable diseases. Okay, right. So many examples. If you get a comparative note on this, some points that I'm showing here are useful to you. So infectious diseases, community hygiene is important. So that is what we are hearing about, right? You have to wash your hands well. If it is a foodborne, waterborne disease, wash your hands before eating. Cover your mouth, cover your face. Face etiquette is very, very important. So that hygiene plays an important role in infectious diseases, but may not be too much in non-infectious diseases. Doesn't matter whether you maintain hygiene or not, you will get thyroid problems or you may get diabetes. Okay, they don't play too much of a role here. There may be some minor role here and there indirectly, but no direct role in such cases. Cancer doesn't matter. You're probably maintain hygiene or not, you would still develop cancer. Right. So they cannot be handled through the hygienic methods. So you cannot prevent them like that. Okay. Right. So these are some examples of infectious, non-infectious diseases and brief idea on them. Something like probably already aware about. Now let's look into the factors. What factors in the context of anthropology that the disease actually spread? Let's focus on that. Okay. So what are the different factors that influence the disease spread? Okay, there must be several factors that influence it. So before getting into even the specifics that I've mentioned here, I would like to show you one source for this. Like traditionally, how did disease actually starting to happen? Okay, were they always there? Take some form of that's a natural part of any living systems. Some survive on us. Some survive by sucking our blood. Some survive by living inside us. So this seems to be the concept that probably is there since ages. Since probably humans are there, or even before humans have originated, diseases seems to be there. They're natural part of the creation. That is what we see here. But certain aspects of what we have done as humans probably have resulted in some of these problems and resulted in the spread of these problems. Like for example, hunting gathering practices. Okay, and also agriculture, like deforestation. Where did we find the space? We started actually, as the human population starting to grow, we've had to find more place for carrying out agriculture so that we can prepare food for us. We can actually generate food for us, grow food for us. So deforestation has immediately started for our stay and also for our food sources. We started performing deforestation. So hunting and gathering practices, deforestation, and also swamp drainage, basically for performing various agricultural activities. So draining some certain areas, right? Or the kind of in the process of preparing dwellings or houses, what had happened. So we started producing ways where water can store. Agricultural practices, rice cultivation for example, water can stay. What happens? Water is a good source for mosquitoes to breed. So like the problems have started to stemming up because of human activities, hunting, gathering, deforestation, swamp drainage, other activities like agriculture, as I was telling you, building houses, industrialization or urbanization. All these things started to provide an environment where infectious agent can thrive and spread. And second thing is, as we either in hunting gathering, we started getting more and more exposed to the animals. Some infectious agents that are common in animals, we got to expose to them. Correct? Those agents entered into our body, and it's a natural phenomena for these agents. Like survival of the fittest, we talked about this in Darwin's theory of evolution. What happens in Darwin's? How did he describe it? Those that actually are capable of surviving better, they flourish. That is what happens. So if a pathogen that actually jumped from, let's say, bats to humans, or bats to maybe pangolins to humans for COVID-19 scenario, this adapted to us. They probably underwent some mutations which made them to survive inside us, utilize our tools. Otherwise, they probably were used to bats, they were probably used to pangolins, or they were used to other animals before. But they underwent mutation. So it's a natural process in evolution where they undergo changes, and those that underwent beneficial changes would survive. Like that, humans' exposure to animals, either as part of the hunting gathering practices or as part of deforestation, we got close to the forest. We started more and more contact with the animals, and their agents were coming to us, started to adapt to us. Okay, so many agents started doing that. Otherwise, there probably was an ecological balance in nature before. Okay, but our too much of exposure to them, or even us trying to kill them as part of agriculture. We don't want rodents to kind of damage our crops. We started killing them. We started killing mosquitoes. We started killing all sorts of things, and then we created ecological imbalance. We affected the ecological balance of the ecosystems. Then what happened? Diseases also at a rate which we didn't expect them to happen. They started now. Why are we seeing more and more problems with mosquito-borne diseases or vector-borne diseases? Deforestation. Where do they go for food? They started attacking us. They came to us. Correct. So, lot of human activities, and in the process of our progression in terms of culture, had also resulted in the new ways of survival and spread of diseases. We are blaming now Chinese for eating all sorts of exotic animals, pangolins. We say that pangolins probably that's how got into humans. Possible. We don't know. We don't still have the great evidence for that. It's likely that eating certain animals like bird flu, basically dealing with birds and staying close to the birds, we started receiving those influenza viruses to us. Okay, but definitely, I think they're talking about the need that we definitely cause the imbalance in the ecological system. So there is an urgent need to fix this. This is what they're kind of talking about. But I'm moving in a different direction here. So diseases emerge from man's contact with other living organisms and represent phases of ecological conflict. So as we went more closer to these animals, probably started exploiting them, domesticating them, I think more and more problems have started in human culture. Okay, and I was already telling you this, microorganisms may be waterborne, airborne, vector-borne diseases. I already discussed about that. And also vector-borne diseases. How did they actually become more common? I was telling you they require specific conditions for breeding. Okay, so some vectors, like let's say some flies or in mosquitoes, they require certain type of environment for their survival. Like ticks or fleas, they need a dry climate. So they're more common in the geographical areas where dry climate is common. So environmental factor here. Ticks or fleas, they survive better in dry climates. Okay, so these infections that wherever the dryness is more common, so those infectious agents, especially those transmitting agents or vectors are more common there. Certain set of diseases are more common in the given region. So geographical relation that you notice here. Similarly, well-known example is female anaphylis and mosquitoes. They live in the water bodies. So for breeding, they need water. So wherever there is a good amount of rainfall, okay, wherever water lagging happens, not flowing water, but then lagged water. So agriculture areas, rice, especially for rice, in the rice fields, they can happily survive. Japanese encephalitis is more common in urban areas, rural areas where rice is normally cultivated. So these type of environmental factors related to the, suitability of environment for vector also defined the disease trends. Right, you can pick a couple of examples here. Female anaphylis mosquitoes, water needed for the breeding, or I told you about the ticks and fleas require a dry climate, and CC flies, I was just talking to you as part of protozoan diseases, they need more dense vegetational cover. So like that, there are specific requirements, and wherever those requirements are met, these disease-causing agents, or spreading agents, flourished.
So this is this para saying that earlier there used to be a limited environmental tolerance, but
Exactly.
man interacting with the environment through various activities they have increased this tolerance? Or
Exactly. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. We're talking about the factors, various factors. We're talking about ecological and environmental factors here. So yes, human activities like this, deforestation, hunting and gathering, and agricultural domestication. So these sorts of urbanization, these sorts of things have increased the dynamics of the problem here. We started, I think, providing more suitability or suitable features or environment for those vectors to thrive. Examples, see some examples that I've given here, more generic, like ticks, natural ticks, dry climate, found in dry climates, mosquitoes being found in the climates where water is common. But here specifically agricultural practices made them more common, made us more vulnerable to them. So geographical and some of them because of the human activities like agriculture and deforestation. So examples, you can also pick up examples like this of how geographical distribution of many diseases correlate with where do these scenario exist. Like for example, brucellosis. Brucellosis is a bacterial infection. So what happens is infection spreads through contaminated and untreated milk, cattle milk mostly. It spreads. So what happens wherever cattle is, wherever domestication is common, keeping cattle is common. So direct contact with infected animals wherever this is common, especially wherever the cattle herds and cattle herders who maintain them, right, are close to them. So we tend to receive infections from cattle. So brucellosis like infections can spread from these animals through domestication process. As I was telling you, bird flu, current scenario, you can tell bird flu, poultry farms or other taking care of other birds. We're exposing to those viruses which are otherwise common in the birds. Okay, more examples are there. I don't think we need to discuss all of them, but some of them are more common in deserts. They're talking about IAS, a microbial disease, more common where temperature is tends to be high. Like that, geographically, they've given several examples here. So, Somaliland, for example, where semi-desert area exists, which tends to be dry, cataract and eye infections, eye-related infections and bacterial infections that cause those problems are more common in those dry regions. Okay, Madura food disease, for example, fungal spores. Fungal spores are introduced into the body, especially when thorns actually kind of prick us. So fungal infectious agents can enter into us. Okay, so these type of geographical conditions are important here. Deforestation, I was telling you, either for this agriculture and those components also have increased it. Density, human density is also a very, very important component. Urbanization. What happened because of urbanization? We started moving to new areas and density has increased. So what role does density play? Diseases, infectious diseases can easily spread from person to person. Directly, one common thing that we notice here is when density increases, disease infection spread also increases. Okay, I think I'm not sure if this one or there was one other content I was reading. This is about measles. They briefly describe about the concept of how diseases spread. So Allen and Stanford, infectious, this biological anthropology book by Allen and Stanford, they talked about infectious disease and biocultural evolution. So nicely they framed in the form of a question. Describe the human biological response to infectious diseases and the ways cultural environment shape the race. How culture actually can become part of this. Okay, so kind of they took it a slightly different dimension, but common themes here. How does the disease spread happens? Food preparation, sanitary habits, sex practices. You can also add social practices. Sexual behavior is responsible for certain transfer of certain sexually transmitted diseases, right? So, like AIDS is one common example. Syphilis, gonorrhea are examples. Sex practices. Okay, wars, for example. Sometimes when people go into the wars, they tend to die from infections more commonly. So those type of problems. And nutrition is something that I'm going to talk again, but just be aware that nutritional deficiencies, it also puts at a higher risk for infections. And also there are specific problems or diseases that happen because of the nutritional deficiency. Okay, and a few examples I want you to take from this document, okay, are as the factors. And here I'm giving examples of cultural factors, socio-cultural factors. So some communities, they have a habit of sharing things. So widespread cultural practices can also define the way infections spread. Sharing a cup, a communion cup, has been linked to the spread of bacterial infections. Sharing of water sources for ritual washing, so which can be seen in different religions like Hindu, Muslims, it is also common. So in prayers in poor Muslim countries, they tend to share the same water. They can spread the water is contaminated with the waterborne agent, then what happens? The disease will spread to others. Correct. So also pilgrimages, common sources for infection, diarrhea, cholera happens in those regions. Why? People don't have enough resources there. So what happens? Their excreta and other material containing pathogens gets contaminates the water. You take the dip in the same water. So as the density increases, and also because of the cultural practices like this and religious practices like this, diseases can easily spread. Okay, I'll share this document with you. Okay, so ecological anthropology document from IGNO, and this two documents. Okay, mainly focus on them. But I want you to develop your idea about first understanding the terminology, epidemiology, infectious, non-infectious diseases. What are the major factors behind it? How do they spread? Socio-cultural aspects and biological aspects. I focused already on biological aspects. I'm talking about socio-cultural aspects here. And also cultural bias against homosexuality. Cultural bias against homosexuality led to the spread of AIDS. AIDS had mostly started spreading between gay populations, for example. Okay, so cultural bias against homosexuality and the open discussion of sexuality, both of these component kind of shaping how AIDS is spreading. Initially, it got appeared in gay communities. In US, for example, it appeared in gay communities because of sexual discrimination. Okay. So also the cultures that where we are noticing the having multiple sex partners also increases sexually transmitted diseases. This is also type of progress that we are seeing in culture. Correct. So because in traditional worlds are more strict, of course we're not talking about the tribal like conditions, but otherwise having single partner was considered to be the common theme so in the society. But in the world that we are noticing and where they have multiple sexual partners, it increases the incidence of sexually transmitted disease. Okay, and most important, I want you to make a note of it. I'm also going to show a case study on this. This is one very good, a peculiar study of how diseases spread through cultural practices. Okay, in addition to what we discussed here, I'm going to show you from this source, Biological Anthropology by Allen and Stein. Not Stein as well, this is Allen. Okay, the PDF I'm going to share with you. So they also talked about a few aspects which I've kind of already covered. Okay, agricultural components, read more on this. Okay, how people were, I think that this is why I was pointing out this article, is the density really important, right? So some diseases only spread through the other agent, viruses. Look at COVID-19. COVID-19 wouldn't spread unless you are spreading it to someone else. You need a host for the viral agents to spread. So we actually have enough density to spread the problem. Correct? Either offices, the urbanization concept here where people gather together, or religious concepts, they spread. So same thing happened. Like with the measles also, larger and denser agricultural populations tend to actually host more diseases. They were comparing briefly about the hunter-gatherer populations versus agricultural populations. Agriculture, I think they were briefly talking that agricultural populations tend to be a bit more sedentary compared to hunter and gatherer population. I think today we are comparing modern populations versus agricultural populations. We are more sedentary than them. Right? People who are working in the various industries, software and other industries, we tend to spend time by sitting. Right? But otherwise, hunter and gatherer populations compared to agricultural people, the agricultural people were more sedentary, had more sedentary lifestyle. That is what they're talking about here. Agriculture and non-agricultural populations also differ in that agricultural populations are more sedentary, whereas the other ones are more nomadic. Hunter-gatherer populations are more nomadic. They're wanderers. And large sedentary agricultural populations, therefore, are more susceptible to bacterial and parasitic like of infections, where transmitted by contact with human waste or contaminated water, which they tend to share. Also, they are close to agricultural families live close to domestic animals. So rats, for example, there are certain plague, for example, plagues can spread from rats to us. So pick up few examples like this: agricultural connection. Okay, and if you want rats or the agents or cattle from which diseases can spread to us, or agricultural practices I told you, where stagnant water is available. Also, there is something called, they talked about worm called cystosomia or cystosomiasis, it is called flatworm. Okay, so worms that cause disease. So these are also common in the areas where irrigation happens. As per WHO, about 200 million people may be infected with this cystosomiasis. 85% of the people living in Africa, as per WHO, got the cystosomiasis infection, which can damage various parts of our body: bladder, kidneys, liver, spleen, intestines, multi-system disorder. It can actually cause multiple different systems. So they're comparing how agriculture versus hunter-gatherers are, density-wise. The markets where we sell the foods, market where we sell the cattle, versus hunter-gatherers are smaller groups. So they have lower risk in spreading diseases compared to the agricultural groups. Okay, also mobility and migration. Mobility and migration, transport. You can also talk about transport as a factor here. Before, let me finish this before going to the last part, which is a case study of Kuru, how it started spreading. So African cases, children have this cystosomiasis, children look like this. Abnormal facial features, body features are abnormal. Okay, migration, mobility and migration. So you know it very well, I don't have to explain. Transport or more connectivity has increased disease rate or decreased disease rate. It positively influences the disease spread or negatively?
Positively. Transport.
Transport increases the infections. COVID-19 wouldn't have happened unless we had this connectivity to other countries. We would have all been happy without COVID-19 if no connections were. Or at least stopping the flights as soon as people would have realized. But it was too late. Many countries would have stopped it, but most of the countries could not. Because of the travel. Otherwise, the diseases which started in China wouldn't have come to us in no way. But connectivity has increased, mobility has increased. And one price of this mobility has been transmission of infectious agents. What price are we paying for mobility? One price is spreading of infections, leading to uncontrolled outbreaks of disease in the population that has never experienced the disease before, like especially small islands. I think this question had come in the exam, mains exam. This context is important, COVID-19 context. They didn't directly ask about it, but small islands are more vulnerable. They're not well prepared. They actually live close by. So people, when they travel to these places, they take diseases, they take infectious agents to them. There's several examples that they have given here. Plague, Black Death in Europe, 1348 to 1350. They talked about the old scenarios here in this article. Outbreak of diseases have happened, especially bubonic plague or plague simply, caused by bacterium Yersinia pestis. So they spread through rats to humans. And this outbreak had happened in China in 1330s. And by the late 1340s, it went to Europe. In a decade time, from China, it went to Europe. And they say that in one city in Italy, Florence, I don't know if you heard about that, the Leaning Tower. Pisa Leaning Tower, Florence is where this is. So that in Florence, as per the reports, they say that March to October 1348, 96,000 cases. And in 1300s, we're talking about, not today. Much less connected than how we are connected today. March to October, there were 96,000 cases in one city in Italy. Okay, and by the end of this epidemic, they said 1/3 of the Europeans died. Because of this problem, 1/3 of the Europeans were killed. So in a way, COVID-19 is not too bad, right? So 1/3 of the Europeans were killed as per this literature. 1/3 of Europeans had been killed. And the economic and cultural life of the Europe was forever changed because of that, as it is changing because of COVID-19. Okay, like that, they talked about many examples. European explorers, colonists traveled to many places carrying diseases like measles, smallpox, influenza, whooping cough, STDs. They took it to native populations like North America, South America, Pacific Islands, Australia. Where did the infections got from? They went from one country to other country in the form of explorers, European explorers and European colonists. They carried infections. So definitely this migration and mobility and travel had resulted in the spread of the diseases. So this is also a great factor, but a very important factor. I'll send you this. They talked about how people moved around here, causing these problems. Okay, right. So I want to talk to you about this example, one case study. With this, I'll finish this class. So Kuru. Have you heard the disease called Kuru? Kuru is a very rare disease that happens to be caused due to what is called prion. This is another category of diseases we don't normally discuss about it. It's neither bacterial, viral, protozoan, fungal. It is caused by something that is very, unique. Basically, a protein. A protein causes the problem. An abnormal protein causes the problem. It is called prion disease. Prion. This is an example for prion disease. What are we learning about? Kuru. Prion disease. So here we're learning about a case study for how a cultural practice can lead to spread of a given disease, spread of an infectious disease. The case study is for spread of an infectious disease due to cultural practice, rare cultural practice. So here the place in question or in study here is a tribe in New Guinea, 4 tribe in Highland New Guinea. 4 tribe, 4 4 tribe in Highland New Guinea. Are you able to see this, or do you want to enlarge the 4 tribe in Highland New Guinea? So in these in this particular tribe, they started noticing this disease called Kuru, which is a neuromuscular disorder. I was telling you this is a prion disease. An abnormal protein can spread the disease, which affects the neuromuscular systems, nervous system and the muscular system, neuromuscular system, where people starting to have some tremors or shivering that happens in them in the arms and legs, and eventually it becomes paralysis in a year. So it starts like tremors or shaking in the arms and legs to paralysis. It moves to progresses to paralysis in 1 year time. Okay, so it's a neuromuscular disease not caused by any infectious agent, but caused by an abnormal protein. It is called prion disease. This is still a mystery. We are figuring out certain prion diseases, still a huge mystery. And this Kuru became an epidemic. So it actually became a big problem. It started spreading in this particular tribe in the early 20th century. Okay, it started in early 20th century. By mid 20th century, that is about 1940s, they saw 200 new cases. Every year, 200 new cases of Kuru that they started noticing. And how many people were living there? Only 12,000 individuals. The tribe, there were only 12,000 people. Every year, 200 people were affected. That's a significant number. Over a period of time, almost quarter of this tribe was killed. 3,000 people were killed by Kuru. So eventually, they started noticing that 3,000 people died of Kuru. All of them from the same ethnic group of that tribe. Same ethnic group from that tribe. And interestingly, most of them were women and children. Look at the connections. Initially, they thought all sorts of things they thought. So, particular related ethnic groups in this tribe. And mostly women and children died from it. But initially, they thought Kuru is like any infectious disease. They thought it's an infectious disease spreading from person to person because TB and those type of problems were recognized at that time. So they thought this infection is spreading like the TB as well. And some people even thought this is a concept of balanced polymorphism because they only knew about those things and they thought probably there is a connection to them as well. But eventually they found out that it is a prion disease. And any idea how this is spreading? It was spreading because of the practice of cannibalism. It was spreading because of practice of cannibalism. So it was mostly caused or entirely caused by ritual practice of cannibalism undertaken during funeral rites. So what they were doing during the funeral, they actually were opening the skull of the person and they were eating. They were practicing cannibalism here. And interestingly, who gets the choice to eat here? Women and children. That is why they were mostly affected. Usually, what do they do here? This entirely by ritual cannibalism undertaken during funeral rites. They were almost always directed by women and was considered to be the women's domain. Young children were accompanying their mothers. Also consumed human flesh. A 4-year-old was also found to be affected by Kuru. 4-year-old was practicing cannibalism. So this practice led to the spread of cannibalism in this tribe. And interestingly, it stopped. As soon as these people stopped the practicing of cannibalism, spread of Kuru also stopped. And no person born after 1960 has reported this disease so far, as per this source. Okay, they say some elderly people still die from that. Maybe they had that practice before, but it is showing up now. It was latent or it was staying inside the body, it's happening now, but overall the practice was stopped. Look how a victim of Kuru looks like. Okay, so basically here proteins aggregate inside their brain and then causing nervous system related disorders. A very complex disease. But later, we have not seen Kuru as such, rarely in some elderly people, but other similar prion diseases have shown up in people. I think in 1990s, bovine form of, it's called bovine spongiform encephalopathy or mad cow disease it is called. Prion, another type of prion disease, people who eat or consume beef, infected animal, they started getting mad cow disease. Okay, so like the cultural practices can also lead to some problems like this.
But they must be cooking it, right? The cow or the cannibalism.
I don't know. I don't know. Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think you're talking about cooking process, killing them, right? Denaturing them.
Right.
But it's a protein. It's not a living farming as such. It's not a living form. It's a very weird. Even understanding viruses is weird for us, right? It's actually more intriguing than that. It is just a protein covered with something. Not even nucleic acids, nothing. So I don't know whether cooking it actually kills it. Let me check that. I doubt that. That's probably, I think, because I was thinking people would cook it and eat because we're talking about scenario of 1990s. Okay, but I doubt if this protein gets affected by the cooking process. So let me cross check. Okay, right. So what did we do today? Today we discussed about epidemiology and defined health, understood infection and disease. We talked about infectious and non-infectious diseases. In tomorrow's class, I'm going to talk to you about nutritional deficiency diseases, nutritional diseases, one, and we're also going to talk about epidemiological transition theory that we are going to discuss, and keeping the corona COVID-19 in mind, I'm also going to briefly discuss with you the emerging pandemics and the reasons behind it, how the disease state and condition is changing. Okay, so it's not a big chapter. So we more or less, I think, if we deal with nutritional diseases, again, a little bit of factual data, nutritional deficiency diseases, very little information will provide you on that, factual. And then we'll focus mostly on the epidemiological transition, Indian scenario. What's happening in India? Where is India in terms of epidemiological transition? A great long-term study had been published, I think 2018. In 2018, I'm going to briefly talk to you, provide a summary on that study. Okay, so we are going to focus on that. So in tomorrow's class, we are going to wind up epidemiological anthropology, right? The components of ecological anthropology I promised, and also these two articles. I'm going to right away send you this. Epidemiological anthropology, give it a read. So this as well as the IGNOS material I'm going to send you. So tomorrow after our discussion, I might give you a bit more information for topics I'm going to discuss. Okay, right.
Tomorrow we'll be meeting in the morning.
Yes, tomorrow we are meeting in the morning. Yes, thanks for reminding me. Yes, so send me a message that tomorrow's class is going to be in the morning. So about 9 to 11, we're going to have class. Okay, so try to give it a read. It's not too complex. I'm going to share this two documents with you right away. Start reading it. And meanwhile, I think later tonight, I'm going to send you the missing components of ecological anthropology. Okay, right. Any questions, guys, before we end the session?
Sir, here we are only learning about diseases that affect the humans and not the plants or animals that we consume and then we get infected, right?
No, not much. Yes, you're right. There may be consuming means if they spread through the animal meat I was telling you about, are staying close to the animals. We actually mostly focus on the anthropological aspect of it, human aspects. Okay, and I haven't seen, because even if you notice the questions, the way questions are asked, they're not focusing too much on any of them. Nothing specifically I've seen questions from this. So mostly that is why I'm actually decided to discuss in the way I've started talking about these components. If you see the questions also, you will realize that. Where is this? Yes, so you will see a couple of questions here. Narrate the evolution of disease and major causes of ill health in human populations. How diseases have evolved. We discussed about the various factors, agriculture, migration. So you focus on that. 2018 question had come on this. And describe the scope of epidemiological anthropology in the study of infectious and non-infectious diseases. So straightforward question on epidemiological anthropology, its role in studying the diseases. And short note, epidemiological anthropology. Twice it came, 10 marker questions. So you need to know briefly write about anthropology, use examples. Discuss the role of anthropology in understanding health and disease. What specific understanding is available with respect to infectious and non-infectious disease. Focus again on infectious, non-infectious disease. Tomorrow I'm going to talk to you about epidemiological transition. That yes, those, and write short note on communicable diseases. Okay, so these questions I'm going to discuss tomorrow. But yes, these questions are mostly non-communicable, communicable, and epidemiological anthropology as such, and evolution of disease. There are 4 themes that if you know, that should be more than. Okay, right, yes. So we'll meet at 9 o'clock. I'm going to send you the link. Okay? About 9:15ish. We're going to meet. I'll send you the link beforehand, so you know what time we are meeting. Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you.